So I thought we could speak about the St Andrews and University of Kent mandatory testing stories. St Andrews has decided that all undergraduates and postgraduates will have to do a test in order to matriculate, i.e. in order to enter the university and therefore graduate. They tend to follow each other. And there have been some very bizarre questions included on the St Andrews test at the University of Kent. I believe this was last week. They had a 4-hour diversity course with some, again, odd questions about white privilege. So I thought we could talk about these two stories, what they represent, try and stillman what's going on here, and also discuss perhaps the underlying psychological issues, what the literature says about what's going on here. You've got the Times article there about the St Andrews story, and it contains two of the perhaps most contentious questions. Do you want to read them out?
Sure. Acknowledging your personal guilt is a useful start point in overcoming unconscious bias. Those who disagree are marked incorrect, and too many wrong answers mean they have failed the module and must retake it. Another question from the course asks, does equality mean treating everyone the same? Those who respond yes are told that is not right. In fact, equality may mean treating people differently and in a way that is appropriate to their needs, so that they may have fair outcomes and equal opportunity.
So, I guess if we had to stillman what's going on here, I mean, the university was approached for comment. It says at the end of this article that students requested this. You were at St Andrews studying psychology, and it also speaks about sexual assault or incidents of those types.
No, there was a scandal about disclosures of sexual assault cases that were happening in the university, especially around an all-male Jewish society, fraternity, sort of the UK or St Andrews version of a fraternity. And in 2018, I believe, or 2019 rather, in the spring, stories started coming out of girls that had been assaulted or had unfortunate encounters with people in the university, and it kind of sprung up an awareness of the sexual culture at the university, which was very much public and publicized
so
in the media.
So you could see why HR people would want to be seen, at least to act on such incidents. I think we also have to think about the type of students. Give people the benefit of the doubt somewhat, and say, look, if you've got let's play up to the stereotypes, an 18-year-old white boy going to St Andrews, privately educated, perhaps they've not interacted with many people of colour, perhaps they've not even interacted with anyone that's not rich or even not straight. Arguably, there's some good intention when we think about wanting to give those types of people a heads up over what others might find, God forbid, offensive. I mean, I thought it was interesting what you were saying when we discussed this the other night about how this is a very kind of Anglo-centric view, because it's part and parcel of having residential universities where people say that people say that the role of the university is to right wingers and conservatives say, well, this is not what the university is about. It should be about not being safe. It's like, well, again, to give the universities a bit of or the HR people a bit of the benefit of the doubt. It's like if you have an entire country with residential universities, part and parcel of the job is lots of young, ignorant people living together, and so they want to smooth things over. They don't want a rough time. In obviously, you were saying in Spain, this is just would be anathema, right?
Yes, it's just inappropriate. People go to I think something that a caricature liberal and a caricature conservative view of what universities are for. They both agree that universities are places for learning, right?
Yeah.
And if students are going to be living there and therefore socialize there, and their social lives may get in the way of their learning, then that's where the university has to step in.
Yeah.
And that's where I suppose free marketeers or free socialiers just disagree with caricature liberals that these are legal adults. They should be left to their own devices to socialize, to find what is appropriate, to find what is not appropriate within the remit of the law, and that the university has no place in micromanaging or macromanaging the private affairs of legal adults that happen to be students at the university.
It's interesting because I've always had somewhat of an ambivalent relationship with this. You can call it a conservative idea, but this notion that there's a marketplace of ideas, and I know like liberals, or as the Americans call them, leftists, attack this idea from a particular point of view, but I see it as odd simply because a market can be a really good tool for distributing resources, but when we talk about can consumer behavior lead us to more moral directions, like corporate social responsibility, encouraging more greener products, more sustainable products, and if the consumer demands that, blah 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 blah. Like we're all familiar with that kind of model. Like consumer behavior can change things, and of course it can be very powerful. But there is also the basic undeniable fact that a market is only as moral as its consumers are, and if you've got an entire generation or a substantial part of that generation who think in a particular way, or certainly lean in a particular way, or will do so as a result of that institution, then it seems a very odd position. I don't think a conservative one to say, I'll just the marketplace of ideas, let them get on with it. I'm maybe a straw manning a bit there, but it seems like a more conservative position is like, no, we are the adults in the room, and this is what we believe.
That's right. That's very interesting. But what I was referring to, the free marketeers and free socialists, I was meaning I meant to say that those who lean conservative, or at least those who self-describe as such, within the conversation about campus culture and the role of administrators, tend to believe that students should be left to their own devices, and that the university has very little to do as to the management of the social relationships that will inevitably take place and be framed by the infrastructure that the university does have to provide, right? So university, and this is indeed not a very conservative position, right? This is historically or just functionally a liberal position. Leave people alone. Mm-hmm. Nonetheless, obviously,
get off my lawn.
Yeah. Nonetheless, it's obviously been a change of roles, a historical change of roles between conservatives and liberals with regards as to what happens in campuses. So conservatives would have historically, in the United States, at least as far as I'm aware, Camille Paglia has documented this in her writing since the 1960s. Conservatives would be very keen on having curfews on female dorms. Male and female dorms would obviously not have been something that conservatives were comfortable with. Having curfews, no people of the opposite sex in your rooms. Socials or parties would have had to be often approved of, etc.
But the point is, things change, right?
Yeah. Things change. No, things change diametrically. So this is now the position of liberals. And the position of conservatives in universities, that of libertarians, social libertarians, nothing to do with the marketplace of ideas, nothing to do philosophical. It's just a principle of freedom of association and the clear separation between what is of academic concern, and that is the university's domain, and what is of a personal, social matter, and that is the domain of the law and of the people. Individuals and groups.
I guess whenever we're using value terms and labels, it's going to be susceptible to people saying, "Well, that's not what that is." Yeah. But anyway, let's talk about the key issue here. So the first statement was, just to recap. I'll put it on screen now. Acknowledging one's personal guilt is a good starting point. Useful starting point in overcoming unconscious bias.
Yeah.
I mean, as someone that studies psychology, do you want to break down the lunacy of that idea?
Well, I suppose that if psychoanalysis were shown to have any empirical backing, some of which I think may have, free association and dream analysis would come into our play.
Can you imagine HR departments like
Sitting
turning
in
Freudian?
sitting in the
We're going to need you to really
tell me your last
acknowledge-
dream. Oh, I think that crocodile is a symbol for your white guilt,
Yeah.
isn't that?
Yeah. So what's
Okay.
your relationship like with your dad?
Yeah. Oh, racist. Anyway, yeah, the notion that by becoming aware of, I suppose if you were becoming aware of your unconscious bias were possible to do via acknowledging your guilt.
We'd all be doing it.
Yeah, we'd all be doing it because we'd be curious to know what we believe. But I don't understand what the relationship is between guilt and unconscious bias, functionally speaking. There are ways in which we can become aware of our bias, right? We may be put in a situation where we can be shown retrospectively to have treated someone differently on the basis of some socially significant characteristics that we perceived and attached some meaning to, right? We can be made aware of our biases in
Arbitrary
such
characteristics that we made significant.
well, yes, arbitrary, but
Stick.
nonetheless, they're not arbitrarily associated to social meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is not how stereotypes are formed. And in that way, we would therefore be at least aware of the fact that we're not infallible, and that despite all our conscious good intentions, we operate in the world with unfavorably toward some people and favorably toward others, right? Like the famous halo effect. Most of us treat people who are good looking and think of people who are good looking in much more charitable ways than we do of ugly people, don't we?
I mean, that
And-
explains why I've gotten so far in life.
And
Streamlined my way through key institutions. People just throwing the red carpet down. Rose petals. Don't walk even on the carpet.
that
please.
was not my experience of you, but anyway, had to ease my eyes, slow, guys, slow.
adaptation.
Yeah, indeed. Anyway, if I think unconscious bias can certainly be come conscious through experience and introspection or retrospection, and an external person just providing the evidence of our the differences in our behavior on the basis of different characteristics that we perceive, right? But acknowledging our personal guilt should have no functional relationship with our growing awareness of unconscious biases that we hold, and therefore it's a silly statement because it's factually incorrect.
Well, yeah, I mean, like that's
Like, how would it work? Can we try it? Like, I am guilty of what? Of it would be, so for example, I'm
well, in
guilty
these
of being
people's views, you're obviously going to be guilty of all of the above, right? So we are all racist.
But what does guilty mean? Is guilt being aware of the fact that I have privilege that I have not earned by virtue of being a white woman in a Western democracy, and or an upper class white woman in a Western democracy, and that therefore what? Is that guilt? Or am I guilty as charged?
Yeah.
Or
guilt
am I
is an
guilty?
odd- Don't bang the table. for
Sorry.
that. Guilt is an odd. I mean, that's interesting, right? I didn't think about that, but it is kind of an obvious point that guilt is a very specific word.
Yeah.
Right.
Awareness of one's position in society is a
that's-
different
Yeah,
matter.
you can kind of think about how that might redirect some of your conscious
Yeah.
actions and somehow reprogram. The conscious actions are going to be a result of the reprogramming of the unconscious stuff, but fundamentally you don't really have access to the unconscious because it is unconscious. So perhaps through acknowledging the fact that there's just an obvious truism that in a country like the UK where it's like 96% white, like obviously I have a different experience, and some of that is going to be things that I just don't have to experience, which are overwhelmingly negative, like I know stop and search. And I don't even, the fact is, obviously, this is what the white privilege people say, right? I don't even have to think about it. That's what makes it white privilege. But the choice of guilt is obviously a politicized one, very much like the equality question.
You have to feel it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's an emotion, right? Rather than, I guess, like awareness, which is more just like a state. But the thing that we need to hit on here is this notion of unconscious bias just really has to not die, but it needs to be acknowledged for what it is, which is, one of the I think two out of the three psychologists who developed the implicit association test basically stepped away from it. One, Brian Nozick, I think, just said this was, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he said that this was incredibly noisy, perhaps even useless. I'll put the link below so people can read that.
Just because the IAT, the implicit association test, is a bad measure of implicit bias doesn't mean that an implicit bias does not exist. It obviously does. Unconscious biases are run amok in our minds,
and
right?
then the other one is the literature coming through showing that telling people they have white privilege, these training sessions, that they're guilty, there's a substantial backfire effect, and I don't know the effect sizes off the top of my head, but it's enough to indicate that we probably want to give this a second thought. I mean, it's obviously kind of predictable.
So
right?
if we actually wanted to make an accurate statement from the one included in the test, it would be acknowledging or making someone acknowledge their guilt is not a very useful way of overcoming unconscious bias. This seems to be what the literature suggests. I'm not an expert. Far from in social psychology, but that's what I've understood from my superficial analysis.
You want to be incredibly careful when saying at one of the best universities in the world that this is mandatory. Again, that's worth repeating. You have to do this to enter the university. So there are sociological issues, psychological issues, but they're also just like basic ethical issues. I mean, you can have a debate about what the mission of a university is, but is this really something you want to do at all, even if all the evidence aligned in your favour? Because these are two political questions, and the I guess the implicit premises when you do anything like this is that it works. So the fact that there is this literature makes it even more bizarre.
I think we should mention the fact that this is part of a battery of contracts that incoming students at the University of St Andrews and other universities have to sign if they wish to enroll.
Right, I mean, all universities will obviously get you to sign things about plagiarism.
Exactly. So this is part of a package of tests that initially, at least when I joined the university, was only to do with academic conduct. Now they've added sustainability and diversity component to that.
And we should say, obviously, we've both worked in schools where they make you do these online modules, and obviously, unless you are a job's worth, most people just click through at a rate of knots, right? Just being just print the online certificate.
Which one do they want me to click?
So I don't think for a sec, again, this is where the Ben Shapiros are so annoying, right? Because I think they actually think that, this is somehow indoctrination. It's most people are just clicking through. It's what do you need me to do? They're probably not even reading the question. What we're interested in is it's symbolic of social change at such a pace that you can only really put this down to things like social media.
Well, the university is expressing by condoning these statements as things that students who enroll in the university should agree with, and if they do not agree with a number of them, they will not be able to enroll in the university by virtue of that. There being a mismatch between what the university thinks and what the student believes to be the case. The university is indeed not indoctrinating, but setting the score for what the time at the university will be like for that student, presenting itself to the student and letting the student know where they may fit in that system. What I think is important that we mention is that the universities are not blind to the fact that these tests do not work. Okay, if you want to plagiarize, you're going to plagiarize. What these contracts are meant to do is to outline the university's expectations.
If we can catch you, we've got it in writing.
Outline the university's expectations and make it clear what the student may expect if they're seen to be breaching those expectations on the part of the university, right? So such a contract I don't see as a problem, because I think it's useful, right? It's useful for the student to know what the consequences of their behavior may be.
Just to be clear, and it's useful. You're talking about the principle of a contract, not the specific
exactly.
one.
In the case of plagiarism, which obviously has a place in place for learning, and it also protects the university from any contestation of its reaction to the breach of those expectations on the part of a student, right?
Yeah.
So the problem with this, one of the biggest problems for me in this diversity training, and we haven't gotten to the sustainability one because we haven't seen clauses from it. The issue is that this is not the same kind of contract. So the university is not explicitly stating what its expectations as to the social behavior of students are. These are ideological statements.
Yeah.
They're not practical. They're not applied.
It kind of like, if you had to extend the benefit of the doubt, it kind of just sounds like, when an organisation has a cringeworthy, like a motto and a mission, and it's like, I've got friends that work in like PR agencies, and it's like, here at Global Corp, we believe in X, Y, and Z. Here's our suspiciously spot on picture where ethnic diversity does not reflect what the company actually looks like. It could just be one of those, but at the same time, we've got that statement saying from St Andrews saying it was requested by students, which again just begs.
Right, but if it was requested by students, we are assuming that the motivation of students is that such a contract would lay expectations,
but what I was just going to say,
the terms of the behaviour that is deemed acceptable to take place within the university.
But I think it's just sidestepping another issue here. They just don't even mention how many students requested this.
Even if it's a self-appointed group of students, which is most student unions in the
let's
whole
create
world,
a committee
right?
for diversity,
which exists, exists in St Andrews, and it did when I was there. It's always, no matter how big the university is, a self-appointed. That's what student politics is: self-appointed group of people. That's what a lot of politics is too, right? You have to want to be
training.
one. You have to want to be one. Yes, good training if you want to be.
And if you want to be one,
progressive.
You shouldn't be one.
Yeah, exactly. So I wouldn't have a problem with students having requested it, such as I particularly don't have a problem with a sustainability module. But if that module just says consuming meat is bad, do not do it, right? Mm-hmm. And we agree that the university can determine what they provide for students to eat in their own canteens, right? Then the student can therefore agree to not eat meat or whatever. I don't know what the sustainability module is. It may be one step too far if they're telling students how to dispose of their waste, etc. For example, if the sustainability module says, if you are caught throwing away batteries in the general garbage can, you will be sanctioned with X. Do you understand that this is the consequence of disposing your batteries in this general garbage? And if you click yes, or you demonstrate your understanding of the expectation, then you pass the module, right? If the module was made by so many questions. And in the case of sustainability, that would make sense. It would be the analogy or analogous test to the or a contract to the academic conduct one, plagiarism and standards. But this is not what the questions that were selected for the article reflected whatsoever. It didn't lay out any expectations as to how not to behave or how to police other people's behavior within the university community, right? So, for example, it could be commenting on someone else's hair type is an insensitive and xenophobic.
Commenting on a woman of colour's afro is a microaggression.
If the university had said that, I think it would have been a much better module. Even if there is an issue with perhaps for some people with outlining how social interactions ought to be perceived, reacted to, and managed.
But if we go to the Kent story, we just to finish on the Kent one, you do edge closer to that. One of the statements for the Kent course was wearing secondhand clothes can be a sign of white privilege, because if you hadn't worked this out, viewers, it is something that you can do if you're white without having to worry that people might
to bear
think
the social costs of poverty stigma.
That you are poor, that you have poor morals, you've not been brought up correctly.
Dirty.
Hipsters can wear their second-hand clothes, right? And black people might. Again, there's probably like a truism there. I have to look at it's an empirical question, but I wouldn't be surprised to find that that's the case.
Yeah, me neither.
But yeah, I guess your point is, it just sounds like they're saying agree with this.
Well, does it mean in that case
which they obviously aren't,
in
because
the
you can't go into
you
the
can agree with
university.
it? Does that mean that you should therefore stop buying second-hand clothes? In which case, you're contradicting probably the sustainability module.
That's kind of
It's like second-hand buying is better than first-hand buying new things, but it's a sign of white privilege. What should you do?
Yeah, that is.
I mean, that's just why if they were congruous and practical, there wouldn't be so much of a problem with these modules being part of a student's induction into a university.
Yeah. Well,
we may disagree as to what the university standards are.
But perhaps this is just the seed, right? You sow these seeds first because you can't go in and tell students what to do. But once you build up a legal repertoire, right, that says, oh, well, you did sign something that said that this is what equality is. Equality is much more akin to equity, right? It's much more akin to fair outcomes, right? And so you've signed this, and this is kind of like these are our values. And then 5-10 years time, right? This is the Gramscian idea of infiltrating the institutions isn't that you do it all at once. It's that it's a 100-year slow revolution.
Yeah.
Right?
If more institutions, more revered institutions, locus of power, and we understand the relationship between power and knowledge and language, right? Keep redefining terms to mean something that they do not mean, maybe something close to what they mean, but not exactly, then we may indeed expect people to be persuaded by this.
Hayek said that, I think, I'm obviously paraphrasing, but I think he said, speaking about propaganda, that one of the golden rules is that you take old terms and you give them new meanings, right? So
equality means inequality.
Well, the rest of that quote is one of the most prolific offender is freedom. Right? Everyone wants to claim freedom for their own ideology, and obviously that's a whole separate conversation. I think we should wrap up there. We will continue to do these kind of debrief segments when there are interesting stories in the news, not just dull culture war stuff, which I think if people are like me, you get bored of quite quickly.
They're all the same.
Because they are all the same. But I think at least trying to stillman and analyse it from a slightly different point of view is interesting. But there are obviously many things to talk about from a philosophical and psychological lens. So if you'd like more of this, then obviously do subscribe. You can become a patron for just $1 or £1. The link is down below, and for that you get early access, your name in the credits, and lots of other goodies. On the higher tiers you will get Zoom calls with myself, so check that out if you are so inclined. But for now, thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3